Hello, and today we're going to look at captive breeding programs. So, why might you need a captive breeding program? Well, the preference is for um, in situ conservation, which is in the organism's original habitat. And this is preferable for a number of reasons. It means that there's somewhere for animals to go back to if there's been successful breeding. You are conserving all the other interspecies relationships that occur in that habitat, and it's usually a lot cheaper. However, there might be occasions where the habitat has been degraded so extensively that it's just not possible for breeding to successfully take place, and there we have to look at ex situ conservation, or you're looking to just sort of have an additional population somewhere else that you can support or study in more detail. So ex situ conservation is things like zoos, and it's outside the original location. So flamingos in a zoo somewhere in the UK, for example. So there's a number of things we have to consider if we're going to have a captive breeding program. So the first one is keeping species in captivity. And so the first thing we need to consider is the habitat size. Are we going to be able to provide a big enough space so that they can feel comfortable and healthy? Some organisms are just too big and it's not going to be appropriate. So something like a whale, for example. The other one then is things like food requirements. Are we actually going to be able to feed it the food that it needs? Some species are going to be really difficult to try and replicate their natural food for some reason. So fish that eat plankton is easy in the real world for them to sort of find that food, but in captivity it's going to be really hard to replicate. You've also got species interrelationships. So do they have some specific symbiotic relationship? Which we are going to struggle to duplicate. So something like mycorrhizal fungi. Between a tree and the fungi in the soil, or pollinators like the large blue butterfly that overwinters in ant nests. That's going to be difficult to do in a cage because we're going to have to keep the ants to then keep the butterfly alive. And the other one is financial constraints. Are we realistically going to be able to keep all the different at-risk species in a zoo, or are we going to have to prioritize? So, if we actually do manage to keep our organisms alive in a zoo for a prolonged period of time, we're going to look to start to breed them. So we're going to have a captive breeding program. And there's a number of things that we need to do to make sure that we can get them to breed in the first place. So the first one is conditions for breeding need to be correct. So they might only start breeding if they are triggered by environmental stimulus, such as day length or temperature or food availability and body mass. If we don't know these, then we're not going to be able to provide them, and they won't breed, which would be frustrating. So this will require some research to see what the correct conditions are. Population interactions. So we might find that breeding pairs, they like to be isolated from other adults because otherwise the other adults are a risk to eggs or chicks or young. Some need to have a choice of partners versus some that are like pair for life. So again, we need to make sure that we are providing this correct mix of individuals. We've got our breeding habitat. So they need to have sometimes space for courtship, space for display. They might need to have a suitable nest site. They might need to have like tricks to make them feel comfortable. So the classic one of this is flamingos nest in large flocks. If they do not feel like they're part of a large flock, they will not breed. So to simulate this, we use mirrors to make them feel more comfortable in a small captive population. We have gene pool size. So this is where we have a small population will result in low genetic variation, which might result in disadvantageous characteristics becoming common. So what we can do is to ensure as big a genetic variation as possible, we can use a stud book, which is a record of parentage, so who's bred with who. And this ensures that we breed least related individuals to avoid those disadvantageous characteristics becoming common and a narrowing of genetic variation. And the last one then is hybridization, where we have closely related species breed and they lose their value for conservation then. So to avoid this, we need to be really aware of it. And the example is something like African lions breeding with Asian lions. They would never naturally interbreed. They can only really do it in a zoo. The offspring produced would not be useful in continuing captive breeding, so it's sort of a waste of resources. So that needs to be avoided.